All right, we're good. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Leslie. I direct the Housing Initiative Transactional Clinic. This thing's on autoplay. Look at that. Stop that.
Probably my clicker is right there.
All right, I think we're stable. So the Housing Initiative Transactional Clinic is a transactional clinic that works on the development of affordable housing in the Chicago metro area. We work with nonprofit affordable housing developers and tenant groups, all of whom are working towards creation of new housing units for low-income people. So this first slide is just to point you to some additional information about the clinic. I think the easiest way to find these things is just to go to YouTube and search for Housing Initiative Transactional Clinic. The first video on there kind of walks you through one of our more sophisticated transactions and kind of the structuring considerations that were brought to bear there. And then the second one is a more structured overview of how our transactions are similar to other kind of corporate commercial contexts, and some more details about how the seminar component works and that kind of stuff. So we are focused on affordable housing, and housing is a huge problem in Chicago and lots of other jurisdictions. The idea here is that if you don't have a stable platform of housing to live your life, and you're a low-income person with all the challenges that comes with being low-income in our society, it's going to be very difficult for you to succeed in other areas of your life without that stable platform. That's the whole idea. So if we can provide decent, safe housing that people can afford to live in, it will be the launching pad for all kinds of additional human flourishing. And so we do that work in conjunction with nonprofit partners throughout Chicago. This is a sampling of some of those clients. They are community development corporations. They are faith-based organizations. There are homelessness advocacy organizations. They are limited equity housing co-ops, which is a form of home ownership for low and moderate income people. And we work on their behalf in doing some very sophisticated real estate development transactional work. So the kinds of things that we're doing in the clinic, we're counseling our nonprofit organizational clients on lots of issues. Some of that is 501c3 tax issues. We get fairly involved in those with our clients who are 501c3s, other kinds of corporate governance counseling. We negotiate and draft contracts. It's a very contract intensive kind of clinic. We're working on real estate acquisition, so purchase agreements, and kind of title company kind of stuff leading up to a real estate closing. And we're working on lots of financing arrangements, so both on the debt side and the equity side. So that's things like loan agreements, credit agreements, mortgages, pledges of collateral. In the future, I encourage you to take secure transactions, take bankruptcy. If you like property, you might be a good fit for this clinic. And of course, the transactional lawyering class that you all are taking as well. And then on the equity side, we have investors who are participating in our deals. Usually they are participating because they can receive particular federal tax benefits. So it's a kind of a different wrinkle on what the return on equity is for those investors. And we work on a lot of those kind of partnership agreements and structuring of those investments. So I mentioned complex transactions, and I think some of these affordable housing transactions are about as complex as you'll find in practice, because all of them require government subsidy of some form or another. Like the whole idea here is that the market has failed to provide housing that's affordable across different income categories of our society. And so we have to beat the market by subsidizing certain transactions, and then we're going to restrict them to make sure that only low-income people are taking advantage of them and moving in, and that the rents that they're paying are at a level where low-income people can afford it. So that requires subsidy. Then when you get subsidy, of course, the subsidy providers have all kinds of restrictions and rules that need to be followed. So there's a heavy compliance part of this, and then lots of specific rules about funding source X can only be used for certain kinds of costs. So within your budget, you've got to make sure you're allocating those sources to those particular uses. we'll have transactions that are doing, hundreds of units, tens of millions of dollars in capital budgets, and trying to figure out those connections from the sources to uses and make 10 sources of fundings all line up in the right way can be very challenging and complex work. And then we're closing deals. And in a real estate transaction around development, a closing means that you're closing usually on, they're consummating the purchase of land, and you're closing on the debt and equity financing of it. You're working with title companies, co-counsel. It's a big project management achievement to work towards a closing. And it has similarities to lots of other kinds of corporate commercial contexts where folks are working on deals and leading up to closings. So now I'm just going to talk about some of the deals that we've been working on this year and heading into next year. So the first one here, we represent Lucha, which is a community development organization on the west side. Their Encuentro Square project that they're doing. So this project, again, it's a very large mixed use, mixed income, affordable housing development on a multi-acre site. And they're doing it in connection with an experienced for-profit real estate developer. So at this stage in the project, we're representing our nonprofit client in negotiating the joint venture agreement with this bigger for-profit company. So there's a lot of negotiation and the kinds of issues that come up, have to do with who's going to control the joint venture, who's going to make the decisions for it, who's taking the economic risk of front funding a lot of these costs and trying to get to a closing, and then how are we going to share the financial return for the developers from the deal. And you can start to imagine like how these things are interrelated, right? And the arguments that, well, if I'm taking the risk by signing all of these personal guarantees, I deserve more of the financial return. I deserve more of the control of the joint venture, et cetera, et cetera. So our students are involved in pretty protracted and extended negotiations that feed into a term sheet or memorandum of understanding. Then later, when the deal will apply for funding, and when it gets successfully approved, then we'll launch into the kind of real estate development closing part of this, where documents will start to circulate, all the funding sources will have been identified and start to produce their loan agreements and security agreements and whatnot, and we'll start working towards that real estate closing. This is one that we recently completed, working with a nonprofit on the south side called the Greater Chatham Initiative, the Artist on the Nine project. And this one was about building out some commercial space on the first floor of an existing multifamily affordable housing residential development. So pretty classic real estate development work. Our students worked on a master lease agreement to get control in the hands of the nonprofit over this commercial space. So that's sort of the acquisition piece of it. Then we worked on the financing documents, credit agreement, collateral pledges, working with, in this case, a nonprofit lender. The financing there was made more complicated because we had a construction loan coming from this nonprofit lender, negotiate all those documents, and then there's a takeout source of financing, which is a City of Chicago grant subsidy, which is going to come in at the end and repay that construction loan. And they have somewhat different sets of requirements we had to deal with, but we made all of that work. Then on the construction side, we had construction agreements and working with a title company on supervising kind of the draws on the construction loan, which is its own kind of complicated process. And we successfully closed on the deal. It's been built out. There was a groundbreaking or a ribbon cutting, I should say, a couple of weeks ago. And everyone's very excited. The commercial spaces here are being used to house local artists, not to house them, but to provide workshop space and gallery space for local artists and try to support and beef up the art scene on the Mid-South side. Okay, next, this is one in the early stages. We're working with Habitat for Humanity, their branch in Chicago, which is really focused on the West Pullman neighborhood on the south side. Our particular transaction with them this round is going to be development of a set of townhomes in West Pullman. So there, we've been counseling them about what kind of association to think about, informing the townhomes, comparing condominium structures to non-condominium structures. When this gets funded, we'll work on the real estate development side to cause the townhomes to be built. And then the model for Habitat for Humanity is Habitat serves as the lender for the home buyers who come in and purchase these units. The loan has some affordability restrictions attached to it and some recapture provisions. If people exit early, some of the subsidy will be recaptured. So all of that is yet to come. And then I think this is my last example. Also two more examples. We're working with a local church that's based in Woodlawn, the St. John Baptist Temple. We help them form a community development corporation, and they're looking to do senior housing and other community amenities along Cottage Grove. We're working with them now on acquiring some parcels down there for that project. Okay, and then this is the last example, I promise. This is one of our public housing redevelopment transactions, Parkside of Old Town. This is up in the Cabrini Green area, kind of Old Town neighborhood. And here we represent a group of public housing tenants who are kind of elected representatives from the public housing resident group at Cabrini. And they are joint venture participants in this redevelopment. This is one of those that's tens of millions of dollars capital budget, 10 sources of funding, quite complex, and it's going to be a mix of mid-rise and kind of other kind of low-rise apartment style units for a mix of incomes, including public housing residents, other affordable low-income units, and then market rate units. This one we expect to close probably in September or October of this year. All right, then last, I just wanted to say a few points about the student experience in the clinic. And I think this is true for all of our clinics, right? We're teaching for transfer, meaning that very few students in my clinic will go on to practice affordable housing development law. Although it turns out there is an active segment of the private bar that does these transactions. There's an ABA forum on affordable housing and community development where those firms kind of coalesce and network. And it can be a very appealing sector to work in, I think, because the lawyers who are doing these kinds of transactions on the private side, they're doing well by doing good. They're working in law firms, making law firm salaries, but what they're producing is low-income housing that's a benefit to the community. So students who are not going into that practice area, which is most of you, the things that you learn in the clinic that are useful to you in whatever setting you go into, I think can't be emphasized too much. So students learn techniques of interviewing and counseling. How do you prepare for an interview? We talk about different ways to prepare, the differences between first tier and second tier topics. We talk about the T-funnel technique as a way of kind of structuring the interview to make sure that you get what you need out of it while not alienating the person that you're trying to glean information from. And then on the counseling side, we teach client-centered counseling. There's the client's objectives that matter, and our job is to help them walk through a good decision-making process where they can make decisions about their deal that's in line with their values, their objectives, their profile for risk. I've talked a little bit about negotiation. That's a heavy part of our practice, working with sophisticated contracts, lots of that. And then I think it's important to emphasize we're working with students to develop what we call habits of professionalism. And this is the idea that it's important to think in advance about what you're doing as a lawyer and to carve out time to reflect on what you've done, all with the idea of making yourself a better lawyer in the future. And no one's going to think about your development as a lawyer necessarily as much as you should be thinking about it. So we're trying to give students the tools to help them embark on careers where they will be thinking about those things and always seeking to improve and be the best lawyer that they can be. So I will stop there.